and welcome to Fiber Trek. My name is Sarah. Welcome. You are most welcome to my studio space here in the North Woods of Maine. I am so grateful that you all join me on this creative journey, especially those that contribute financially through Patreon. It is humbling and encouraging. On this edition, we're going to chat a little bit about spinning in the grease and my plans for a small Romney fleece. There is knitting. I'm so glad you're here. Let's catch up.
I won't get close to your heartache if you won't open your door. I'm feeling kinda lost when your mind is hiding whatever that is choking your chest. I can see it in your eyes that you're shaking 'cause you're holding it back. What you want, then baby try to believe me when I say that you can tell me anything. I can see it in your eyes that you're shaking 'cause you're holding it back. Maybe you'll make up your mind, now I'm here by your side.
Coming back to my spinning practice has been a priority for me since I have started to have this contemplative conversation with myself around the old me, the old practice, getting back to kind of, and I've mentioned this before, my pre-Ravelry self. I find myself getting swept away in the present momentum of the fiber world, whether that's through content that I'm consuming on YouTube or through Pinterest or my friends, and finding a way to kind of be grounded in that original impetus of wool. You know, I've been kind of moving through that, whether it's revisiting some of my old stash or books or patterns, but I think ultimately getting my hands into the actual wool, I would benefit from that. Pulling that practice back in with spinning, I wanted to really make sure that I picked a material that would reflect it back to me. I'm not just spinning some top that I picked up on this travel or that travel, but something that was very kind of sensory, and you know, it invigorated me sensorily. Is that a word? Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I've decided to pull out the small Romney lamb fleece I picked up at Fiber Frolic last year, and I'm going to spin it in the grease. And I think I had mentioned that in a previous episode, if you've been with me in some of the testing that I did. And I want to keep it in the grease because I like this rawness that it brings to my spinning. There's smell, there's the tactile element. you know, different species of sheep have different lanolin contents. Some of the primitive breeds tend to have less lanolin. You know, when we I'm going to put these combs down before I whack myself in the face. Versus, you know, species or breeds like Merino, you know, Rambouillet, Cormo, some of those derivatives tend to have a heavier, greasier fleece. And obviously, there can also just be variations within the genetics of the breed. This particular Romney is not heavily greased. It doesn't have any, you know, skin matter. Sometimes you get, I can't remember what it's called, there's like a flaking that happens, or a yolk that happens in the waxes of the animal that, you know, is on the fleece itself. And that's genetics. I mean, that's, you know, part of evaluating and looking at your fleece and seeing what you get and how can I work with it. So this particular animal was coated, that said on the tag. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to just work with something raw, just minimally zero processed. So the processing that I am choosing to do to it is I am combing it on this set of mini combs. These were a gift a long time ago when I started a shawl project where I was working with all of the heritage endangered species here in the United States from the Livestock Conservancy. And these were a gift from Knitting by the Sea, Lisa, Saratoga Knits. You can catch her podcast. These are great for preparing right at your wheel. I talked about using these in that previous episode, which I will try to remember to link down below. I also, if these are not something that you want to invest in quite yet, but you do have fleece, you can use the undercoat brushes. You can get them at the pet store just to flick out these locks. There's a really nice lock structure here. And by not washing it, I can kind of preserve some of that and work with it. Once it kind of gets, you know, all jumbled together, while combing does help move and align all of those fibers, you don't quite get everything back together. And I think that this will ultimately preserve quite a bit of the fleece. It's very strong fleece. It's got some variation throughout it. So what you saw me doing earlier was sorting it, stapling it very basically, putting some of the longer stapled pieces of that fleece into one bag and the shorter, crimpier staples into another, just because I wanted to kind of create something of an even pull off my combs. Sometimes when you have different staple lengths on the combs, the longer fibers come first. They may have a different texture than the shorter fibers. We see that quite a bit in dual coated animals. So that initial pull off your combs is going to be all of the longer fibers, like on an Icelandic. It's going to be all that tog, and the shorter, downier fibers are going to be left, which is your thell. And so it kind of creates a on your spinning. It doesn't blend it. So I kind of wanted to help myself a little bit pre-combing, take it away from your face, Sarah, pre-combing, so that my yarn is a little bit more even. So again, I'm spinning this in the grease. I'm using the mini combs just to open it up a little bit and just do a little bit of prep. You could, like I said, you could spin this right from the lock. It's nice and open. It has a nice crimp structure. But I like having, it's easier on my hands to not be fiddling with it so much. So by combing it, I can kind of create a little bit of a nest, if you will, or a piece of top to spin from. So there is a bit of stickiness on this fleece. So as I'm spinning it, I am working a little bit harder. I learned to spin. I taught myself. I did take a class, but initially when I was working with fleece, I did teach myself on raw grease Icelandic. And that stickiness actually helped me a little bit, I think, in understanding my drafting zone. So I've had the same kind of experience with this Romney. Everything's just a little bit, sticky isn't the right word, but it doesn't, there's not a lot of air because that grease is creating density. After I spin it, I will wash it. I do want to leave a little bit of lanolin, I think, in the overall yarn, and who knows what I'll knit with it. But I'm just really enjoying the sheer kind of rawness of this spin, and getting back to, you know, oh golly, having that smell, which is a sweet clean, earthy, grassy smell. If you caught my Patreon, you'll know I'm really getting into scent. I'm not going to create this as a perfume, don't worry. If you saw my Patreon episode, you'll understand kind of where I'm going with that. But it has like a real transportative scent to it, and it's one that I personally enjoy, and I know that not everybody does. So if you're looking for kind of a sensory experience and you're a spinner, I would definitely recommend spinning in the grease with the right fleece. If you are heading to Rhinebeck, perhaps you are thinking about picking up a fleece. And yeah, looking for a nice kind of open fleece, not a lot of heavy lanolin or heavy wax grease in it, and not a lot of, matter necessarily. You want this to be a pleasure to sink your hands into, pick up and spin. And you want it to be easy prep, kind of right at the wheel. At least that's what I would prefer. Overall, when we look for that fleece, we maybe have an idea in our head about a type of fleece or a breed, whether that's primitive or fine. We like to spin Cormo. We want something plush. But I know that for me, when I go into a fleece tent, I am all visual cues, and I am looking for natural colors, lots of open locks, structure, silkiness, shine. I don't spin a lot of those kind of plush, fine crimped fibers like merino, rambouillet, Cormo. I often end up, no surprise here, with Coopworth. Romney is one of my favorite. I like spinning BFL, Leicester long wools, those types of long stapled open locks, which really do lend themselves to spinning in the grease. So, if you do find yourself in the fleece tent, you definitely want to look for strength. How does your fleece respond? I would definitely talk to the fleece tent manager and see how they want you to handle your fleece or evaluate your fleece. But we're looking for strength. We don't want to see, or we want to be aware of any breaks that might happen in the fleece that can be mitigated. But if you're looking for, long wool, comb it, that type of experience, you're going to want to know about your break, because that break, it might change the actual staple length, which might lend itself to being carded into rolags. You might be able to cut it, but it's going to affect the overall staple length that you're actually purchasing. So we're looking for strength. Everything else you can probably do by eye and touch. Do you like the way it feels? Do you like the way it smells? Uniformity, if you're able to have them lay it out for you so you can see it. Was it well skirted? How is it going to be to staple? Is it going to be lots of short fibers and only a little bit of long fibers? Is this something you're splitting with a friend? Does that color run the whole way through, etc.? So, you can use your eye to do some of that, use your hands to use some of that. But doing that test strength, understanding the lock structure and how that's going to respond, how you want to prepare it, what you would necessarily, how you like to spin. I'm sure that those are all obvious things that you know. But spinning in the grease is definitely a great way to interact with the elemental foundational pieces of our knitting craft. So yeah, I'm gonna thoroughly enjoy this. I'm gonna fill up that bobbin. I'm gonna just make a 2-ply. I'm gonna give it a little bit of a hot water bath, not gonna scour it, and see what we come up with. So what else are you planning to do if you're going to Rhinebeck? Are you gonna hit Tidal Yarns, my absolute favorite? There's a potter there from Maine that I would love to see in person. Her pottery is really graphic, and she does a lot of animals on it. She also has other textiles that she puts her artwork on. I will list her down below. I think she's from Belfast. Her name is Jenny. Blue Arts Fiber. I don't know, I'll list it here. Maybe you'll sneak by and grab yourself something beautiful. So, but lots of wonderful vendors. I was going through the vendor list to look for lots of different sheep breeds, minimally processed, a little soulful stash. yeah, so I think if you're going out, I hope you have a wonderful time. I'll be watching all the content and be there in spirit. And who knows, maybe I'll get to head out next year. So something to look forward to. Welcome to the knitting portion of the episode. Welcome, you are most welcome. I always like to take a minute here at the beginning to offer up my deep gratitude for all of you that have come along on this creative journey with me, that share your insight, comments, like, subscribe, follow the vlog. Thank you so much. A special, deep, heartfelt thank you for those that compensate this project through Patreon. I find that deeply motivating and invigorating, and not only for the creative momentum with textiles, surface design, mixed media, but also through challenging me to become more adept and creative with the way that I shoot different types of stories, or you know, different types of equipment that I might be able to use to enhance the experience, and that will kind of create a little niche here. I feel like I am on the periphery, and I want to keep it that way, and I appreciate the financial support that allows me to do that. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone who is joining me here. Momentum, let's talk about that. I know that at the beginning of the summer, I was definitely a bit ragged, coming off the end of a school year and gearing up for some trips. Lots of content coming in, lots of ideas, and I am settling into the fall here in Maine and grateful for the shift that that brings. Summer is very explosive energetically. You know, you're out there, you're growing, you're thinking, creating, traveling, visiting, and fall and winter kind of offer an opportunity to build some routine. There's also that shift, at least for me, in the way the air feels, and things start to come in. It's like a big weighted blanket, and I can definitely appreciate that. My personality and the energetic makeup of my soul appreciate that kind of resistance and force of coming in. So in some ways that does allow me to, you know, that settling allows me to take a look at what's happening across my projects. I'm not going to talk about work, but you know, that building that routine and kind of steadiness. And that oftentimes allows me a little bit of wiggle room to try something new, or try something new, build some new skills, think about something differently. I'm not in that kind of doing, making, but I'm in that little bit of reflective phase. And what I've seen a lot of lately, and I'm sure you have too, if you are watching any other podcasts, or if you use Pinterest, is, or even fashion trends, is a lot of granny squares. Not only in garments, but bags and afghans. And this has kind of come my way, and I'm resisted getting into crochet. I have used crochet for a lot of different finishing on sweaters, but overall it's never appealed to me as a fabric for garment making. I just like what I can do with knit fabric better. And I didn't really get into granny squares because I wasn't really into blankets until maybe this moment. But what I've found is that I was really looking for a way to work with old yarns, all my stash yarns, all the bits and pieces. I know that we have them. I'm in knitting and spinning for over 25 years, and I have been loath to get rid of some of these special yarns that have come my way, or I've spun, or have been used in sentimental projects. And so they've built up. I mean, they're little tiny bits and pieces, and I also have bigger skeins, but I thought for a long time, I was like, oh, I can use it as a piece of color work here. I could do this there. I can, you know, fit it into a hat, which I totally can, but I have a lot, and that's a lot of hats. So I decided to try my hand at crocheting some granny squares, because I thought they'll be perfect, little tiny bits and pieces. And I know that there's kind of the cozy memory blanket. People use their, what's the word I'm looking for? Mini skeins to do these types of things, and it's stash busting. And I don't know why it took me so long to get here. And I don't want to be the person that states the obvious or is redundant. So I don't need to tell you why I feel like this is going to work out perfectly. But I decided to try it. I maybe was a bit intimidated by building a new skill set, and some of my crochet, when I have done it in the past, hasn't felt intuitive. It's felt very awkward, as you might have seen in the opening shots. And so I was kind of like, ugh. But having settled, I found a tutorial by Erica Arnett on YouTube, and I followed her tutorial for the granny square, and I feel like I did an okay job. I built some rhythm around it. It did feel awkward. Then that's a natural part of that process, right? Like that awkward feeling. Watercolor felt awkward. Not as awkward as this did, because I know how to hold a paintbrush, and that's similar to holding a pen, similar to holding a pencil, markers, those types of, that kind of kinesthetic memory experience that you have from other elements of perhaps your more mundane, maybe mundane isn't the right word, but your more functional life, that kind of functional holding. Now, I'm not a watercolor artist, so I don't use them in a particular way. I hold it like a paintbrush, or how I would hold a pencil. But this doesn't feel similar to any other functional skill that I do. So that was awkward for me. But I did, like I said, build some momentum and rhythm. This was the first one that I did. I did try my hand at using a smaller hook, with some fingering weight yarn. This one hasn't been blocked or anything. And then you saw me working on my latest one, which is now blocking, which is kind of a DK worstedy weight version. This one I did completely independent. In my line of work as speech pathologist, sometimes we'll think about moving somebody forward with different levels of support. So, you know, modeling, prompting, cueing, and then ultimately being independent. So this one I did completely independent. I didn't have any guiding model, or I wasn't following a written instruction. And so I was quite pleased that I could remember how to do the whole thing without having to reference the tutorial. So again, I am really happy with this skill. I like the way it looks. I'm not being too hard on myself looking for perfection. As you can see, some of these, like this one's a bit wonky with my tension. I did find tensioning to be a challenge, but again, building some of that muscle memory and kinesthetic experience. And this one, I was happy with too. I don't necessarily have an idea about how to put them together, if I will. Really, this is more about being able to work with some old yarns, some sentimental yarns. I've talked about this in previous episodes. A little bit of that nostalgia I'm having for kind of my old self, my old knitting days. And I'm talking pre-Ravelry, which is one of the reasons I think I talked last time about using Cheryl Oberle's book, kind of just going back to some of my, I don't know, old yarns, old books. So yeah, so I think that there's a little bit of that wrapped into this, and wanting to move through. So there's like that kind of practical wanting to move through stash. Also that sentimental piece of wanting to work with some old yarns. I have a lot of hand spun. I have hand spun here that I knit into some collars that I made for my dogs when they crossed the veil. I hand spun the collars, and from Icelandic wool that was my sheep. And so I wanted to work with that. I have bits and pieces of that, and I want to use that somehow. So anyway, that's kind of where this crochet journey started. It has that pragmatic piece and the sentimental piece. It has a little bit of that challenge of learning a new skill, which I was craving. And yeah, so I'm quite happy with where that's going. I don't have a plan. What I did do is I went through my stash and I separated out some yarns so I can just kind of pull from them. So this is one of the first project bags I ever made years ago. But I kind of just sorted. This is kind of fingering, sport, and then I kind of have a DK to worsted bucket. And there are some whole skeins in here. Not that I would necessarily, you know, set that aside to just use in crochet, but they're bits that I already have used multiple times for sweaters, hats, accessories. And so I've thrown them in here. I know they're here now if I want to grab it, but I can pull from here to work with for the crochet squares. So yeah, so it's kind of a mix. There's some hand spun gifts in here from my friends who have hand spun. You know, again, pieces that are just a bit too small to fit into anything else. So I'm, you know, again, it was just nice to revisit. I'm really pleased with myself for persevering through and taking the opportunity to consolidate some stash. So I definitely recognize that I am not like some other content creators, super fast knitter or finisher of knitwear things. And so some of these projects will be familiar to you, but there is little bits of progress that I thought I would share. And the first one is the Frokengard. Been working on this sweater a long time. If you've been with me for pre-pandemic, you'll recognize this project. And I do have a focus to finish it. And I picked up for the second sleeve. This was a bit of a journey figuring out, because I did not write down the numbers. Why I don't do that, I don't know. To figure out how many stitches I needed, but I finally got there in the end. There was also a moment where I forgot what size needle I was knitting this on, and luckily, because I've been documenting it for so long, I was able to go back to a previous episode where I talk about the sweater. I am knitting this on a US 3 Frokengard from Koftaboken, I think 2 and 3. There's a child's version in 3. I am knitting this as a pullover. I engineered it myself through a translation that my friend helped with, and so I added short rows in the back. And knitting it on a US 3, Hillesvåg, which is a Norwegian yarn. Their Soya for the cognac for that color, and their Vilja, which is a lamb's wool for the contrast. So that is the Frokengard. Now, that has been traveling with me as I commute back and forth for work. What I've left here and what I've enjoyed working on while I've been home this weekend is the Littla Diamond Shawl by Cheryl Oberle from Folk Shawls. This is a Faroese shawl. This is the smaller version, believe it or not. This is the Littla. I'm knitting this in some Nutiden from Honor och Air, which is kind of a sliver. It's an unspun, or it's pre-yarn, so you know, kind of it's not a roving, but it's similar to Plotolopi, right? Pre-yarn. And so I'm still working on the lace portion of the border. So this takes me quite a bit of time to knit a row. I mean, because not only are there a lot of stitches, but I have had to really shift the way that I knit and tension based on this particular yarn. So I am a little bit more tender and careful as I'm knitting across versus some of my other projects. So it does take me a little bit of time. I'm adding away. I have no need for this immediately. So I'm just enjoying the process, but I am really looking forward to the finished shawl. So that has been on the go here with me. The other thing that I have been working on, it's not stalled, but I'm making some decisions, is my Salalu sweater. This is from, is it Jenna or Jenna Cosette and Knitted Kalevala? Well, I should say the chart and the idea, the concept is from that book, but I am using the High-Low sweater by Deborah Parcella from Tidal Yarns. And this is a raglan shaped pullover, and I'm using that pattern, and I have inserted this chart from the Knitted Kalevala. So I'm making some decisions about the length. I think I'm going to block it and try it on and then decide if I want to keep knitting the hem. I've decided to do the hem in a 1x1 twisted rib. The pattern is done in a 2x2 rib. I think it's about 3 inches or so. So you can, so anyway, I want to make some decisions about that. So I haven't touched it, and I will be picking up for the sleeves very soon. This is knit on a US 4. So I am looking forward to getting some of these sweaters off the needles that are on smaller size needles. And I'm going to put some energy into that, just clearing the decks for sweaters before I cast on anything new for them. So those are the 2 sweaters I have going. I realized recently that my new niece, she's not new, she's 8 months, 7 months old, is getting ready for her first birthday in February, and she doesn't have any knitwear. So I'm going to rectify that. I decided to cast on a sweater for her. I knew I needed to get something for her. She's wearing hand-me-downs from her other siblings, but I wanted her to have her own personalized hand knit sweater from her auntie, and so I needed to make some decisions around that. I immediately went to Frogginet Designs, Lisa Chimney. I've knit a couple of her patterns before. I really like a lot of her designs for children. I considered doing the Mandarines Melody Hoffman, the little tulip sweater, which she knit in a mohair and a Nutiden. But I wanted to make something work for the leftover Mancholopi I had from my niece's shawl, which I knit the Nicole shawl by Amy Scher. And so I needed to match the yardage. So Lisa's patterns had some of those opportunities. Like there she had like a kind of a little pullover. It wasn't like a full pullover sweater. It's kind of shaped like a V, so I considered that. I also found that she had some really beautifully knit and shaped bonnets for children. I think I'm going to knit her one of those. I found while I was stash diving and sorting this blue merino yarn that I had from one of the original clubs that I joined over 10 years ago from Woolen Rabbit. She was one of the first clubs I joined. That and Bare Naked Wools were 2 clubs that I participated in. And so this is one skein, and I'm wondering if I can get a sweater out of this. This is a fingering weight yarn. So I don't know, I have some ideas about the bonnet, some ideas about knitwear. Ultimately, I landed on the hyphen sweater, and I have cast it on. This is a yoke sweater. It is a cardigan. It is knit top down, and I have started on it. I am knitting it on a US 8, and I'm going to knit the 18-month-old size for my niece, because she's a lovely rugged gal, and I want her to be able to wear it for the whole winter. So 18-month size, US 8, Mancholopi from Wool Dreamers. I've talked about this yarn before. It does come off the plate. They call these a cheese, doubled. It's from the is it Manchego sheep, or is that the cheese? I get a little bit confused about the name of the breed. From Spain. It has a nice plush kind of spongy feel to it. So I think that'll make a nice cozy garment to wear over, you know, her shirts and things. So this is purple colorway. I don't remember. So there we go. Annie is taken care of. Of course, with the discussion about knitting sweaters for nieces and nephews, my nephew Cameron wants another Icelandic yoke, which I love to knit for him. So I am thinking about using some of my personal Lopi yarn that was spun for me from an old sheep named Little Pharaoh. It's a beautiful deep brown. I've talked about it before. It was spun for me at a rustic fiber mill. He did a really beautiful job. So I've got that kind of hanging around for the new year, getting Cameron in a new Icelandic sweater. I knit a Plotolopi for him last year, and knit Dog Star by Tin Can Knits. So we'll get something hopefully on the go for him. I have for a while, I forgot to talk about this last time, but I brought home from Crux Fibers. She's in the Yukon. She's based in Whitehorse, Brittany. I brought home 2 skeins of her low mileage wool. This is from the 2022 fall clip. It's a Gotland BFL crossbreed, and it was milled in Ontario. The shepherding was done in Caroline, Alberta, Crocus County Shepherdess in Caroline, Alberta. 236 meters, 258 yards, 105 grams. It's considered a sport weight. And she calls this, did I mention her low mileage wool? This is Ray's Lamb. I got, as I said, 2 skeins. And I was really, when I saw this yarn, I really started to think about this book, Sark by Kate Davies. I've wanted to knit a couple things out of this for a while. There's a lot of beautiful accessories in here, which I think this will be nice for. Hat and a pair of long fingerless mitts. There's a number of sweaters. Her sweaters, I always want to knit them. And Kate Davies is hanging around again as well. I've been thinking about her books a lot. I really love her aesthetic and design. So I'd like to knit from them. So we'll see what the new year brings once I get these sweaters off the needles. As I said, clear those decks and think about that, where I'd like to go with some of the yarns that I have. Now, as I was kind of going through and organizing and thinking about where to put my focus, I found this cast on. I totally forgot about it. This is the Aloft shawl by Becca Knits, and I'm knitting this. I cast this on in my Handspun singles. This is Bybrook Farm, Romney. It's from Michelle's farm, Bybrook Farm in northern Maine, up in the county. This is the singles that I spun, and it's a really beautiful warm gray. And so I forgot, and I was like, oh my God, I picked this up. I was like, oh, I love this texture. So maybe I'll throw that in the travel bag and see if I want to pull it out. Anyway, that's what's been happening in the knitting world. Lots of exciting adventures to have here, and I feel really good to have cast on a project for Annie, and I think that will be an easy, completed win. As far as completions go, I was, again, really happy to move one of my quilts out, which was the Orkney quilt. I posted about that in my Instagram. And this is by Robin Ruth Designs. It is finished, bound, and out of the studio. And that was motivating as well. So it was good to complete some things. I like that feeling. I mean, I know we like the feeling of casting on and that kind of spark of projects. And then there's the process, and then there's the finishing. And I was glad to feel that. Finding little pieces to finish and feel it can pull me back into process and that steadiness of row after row after row. But there is something really, as you know, satisfying, right, about completing that circles back to the spark, to the process, etc. On that note, I think I'm going to bid you a fond farewell. Again, thank you so much for joining me on this creative project journey. I hope wherever your fiber treks take you, that you return home safe with a little bit of soulful stash. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.